Thank you, Hannah. Yes, I was struck that Jürgen was enthusing about opportunities around the world, but no mention of Europe, the home base of his global company. Anyway, we might get into that. We've just got half an hour to discuss the multiple intersecting factors leading to innovation in the pharma industry in Europe, and we'd need half a day to get into it properly. So I won't say anything more myself, beyond reminding you that we will have 5 or 10 minutes for questions at the end. So I'm going to start with Nathalie, please. Could you just start us off with a quick EFPIA view of where Europe currently stands in the race to be at the forefront of medical and life sciences innovation?
You said it, Clive. Jürgen mentioned Berlin once. And everything was about everything else in the world. I mean, Europe is at an inflection point right now of a tendency to lose out on every other part of the world. Over the last 20 years, we've lost a quarter of global R&D investment. And that is a trend that is continuing. But we have an opportunity, which is fantastic. The European Union is revising its pharmaceutical legislation, and there is an opportunity for the first time in 20 years to stop that downward trend and inverse it, in theory. Earlier this week, we published new research that showed that the text that the European Commission has published in April, which is draft, so there's still hope, actually exacerbates that trend. And the expectation, if that text does not change, is not changed by the co-legislators in the Parliament and the Council, is that we'll lose a further third of R&D investment by 2040. So that would put us down from 32% of global investment to 21% by 2040. So there really is an opportunity to put ourselves back on the map today. We need to seize that. Heads of state have understood that pharma innovation is important. In March, they called for increased incentives, better conditions. We're not seeing that translated yet, but as I said, the process is still ongoing, and I'm hopeful that as a community we can make sure Europe goes back on the map.
Thanks, Nathalie. We'll get into some of the improvements, perhaps, that you'd like to see later, but Jacky, I'd like your view as a biotech entrepreneur. How do you find it operating in the European environment as far as innovation is concerned?
Yes, Clive, there are several aspects where we are, as entrepreneur of small and medium enterprise, regularly have to focus on, which is money. We have to get funding. And that's why what Nathalie brought on the pharmaceutical new legislation is very important to us, because when they talk about reducing the exclusivity period, for example, and forcing us to launch a product in every country. This is going backwards for us, because it's very difficult to find money to funding or innovation if we don't have some incentives. Because, you know, we spend all money, and during 10 years before we potentially go to market, because it's not a smooth ride, you know, we have hiccups, you know, and we have reorientation, etc. So we cannot count only on composition of matter. We need some incentives on the regulatory side. And that's why we are working with all the players, you know, to try to influence and say, you're going to kill the ecosystem in Europe that is improving, but you are losing ground, as Nathalie just said, over US and China or East Asia.
So, Nathalie, what are the most important changes you'd like to see in the legislation in its current form?
Well, considering we've always had less money in Europe, I mean, I've been now working in biotech and pharma for 28 years. We've always had between 5 and 10 times less money. So that is not something we're going to fix than the US. It's just a reality that we have. Everything else has to be squeaky clean and fantastically enticing for a company like Jacky's to want to set up in Europe and stay. This means that the revision right now of legislation, which is 20 years old, you can imagine, needs to catch up in terms of regulatory facilities for the new tech that is today, compared to the one of 20 years ago, but also for the new tech that is coming in the next 20 years, which is going to be a mix between advanced therapies, AI. So regulatory-wise, we need to future-proof, upgrade, and I think that's absolutely possible. There's also an opportunity on antibiotics, antimicrobials. Maybe we can be the first region in the world to have incentives to develop antimicrobials and really make those breakthroughs that we need for that silent pandemic that's coming. But on the other side, you also need the right conditions. You need the right incentives. If in the US you have protection for biologics of 12 years of intellectual property or data protection, and in Europe today it's 10, the proposal in the legislation to go down to 8 doesn't make sense. So we're losing ground. We've lost a fourth of our R&D investment, and we're going to protect less. That doesn't make any sense. So you want to increase the incentives. You want to increase the stability and the predictability for investors to say, wow, Europe, those are great conditions. I'm going to go there, even though there's less money, because I know that at the end of my 10, 15 years, I'm going to get a good reward on my investment and a predictable one. So concerning ideas, and the reason to reduce is, and as Jacky was saying, we'll give you back the years if you're on all 27 markets within 2 years. So an idea to mix a framework that is made to regulate safety and to incentivize research with a forcing of access, which you can't do at European level, because those of you who are familiar with Europe, you have to get access in every single member state. It's not something that you can do at European level. So mixing policy solutions to problems in a very concerning way, which, as I said, from the research that we published earlier this week, will just continue that downward trend and just make us irrelevant. And maybe we won't even appear at all in the speech of Jürgen in the future, which is even more worrying.
So before we move on, I mean, would you say that protection of intellectual property, exclusivity, is that the biggest single issue for you out of the whole thing?
No, it's not the single issue. There is another issue, as I said, I take my example. We try to be very quickly global. In other words, we have investors from Europe and we have investors from the US. Money in Europe is just not available like it is in the US. So going to the stock market in Europe is not even an option for us. It's about the NASDAQ. That's it. Which means European companies become Americans. And so there is a topic, how could we make the ecosystem on the financing more comparable with what happens in the US? I don't have the solution, but we have some guidelines and some regulation on our pension funds, for example, that cannot invest on the risk-taking aspect, Can we work all together to open up a little bit that, to create a real, much larger financing ecosystem for biotech, I'm talking, which is a very special area. But again, if we are not pushing the innovation, we are fueling the innovation in big pharma. If the ecosystem of biotech is not working, what's going to happen on the pipeline of big pharma?
So, Nathalie, the changes that Jacky has just been talking about in terms of financing European companies, he said disarmingly that he doesn't have a solution, but whose responsibility is it? It's not really an EU issue, is it? It's a sort of national governments, the industry, the financial institutions working together.
It's the famous ecosystem that Jürgen was talking about before. I mean, this science, these results, these medicines don't come out of nowhere, right? So you have to have the hubs, of which we have too many and dispersed, but fine, we have some. You need to have the money, you need to have the inventors, you need to have that risk willingness, that lack of fear of failing. But then you need to have the environment that is reassuring, that this is the pathway, I invest here, it's a risky business, but within 10 or 15 years, I will get my money back. And today what's happening is that you have an environment that has less capital, is risk averse, and has legislation that is frankly old and is looking to be even more unattractive than it is today. That is just a lose-lose. And at a moment where clearly heads of state in Europe have understood innovation in healthcare is important. Is it COVID? Is it geopolitical instability? It doesn't matter. The point is they've realized, they've put it on their agenda, which is rare, and they've said we want to be in the forefront. Well, if you want to be in the forefront, then you've got to create the conditions. You've got to make the most of opportunities like the revision. You've got to look at other things. You don't have a NASDAQ? Okay, what else can you do? But do it in have an industrial strategy for pharma, for health in Europe. Take it seriously so that you look at the whole ecosystem and put yourself back on the map. Otherwise, we will just be left behind like we already are today. So if you want to inverse that trend, you've got to take some real actions in a concerted way, in a strategy, in a long-term strategy.
Yes, I mean, of course, in pharmaceuticals and medicines, there isn't a unified European market anyways, as there is in a lot of other things. So there are 27 markets to which you need access. I mean, how could that be smoothed out and made more unified? Do you have any thoughts?
I took the example of one of the aspects of the pharmaceutical legislation, which is basically you're going to have to launch, if you want exclusivity, or more exclusivity, you're going to have to launch in every country. Imagine that for small, medium, and enterprises that work very often on rare diseases. It's just no way. So, we should really, it's like they put the hurdle on us not having unified the system before, in other words. And that's just not bearable. And there are alternatives, we're proposing some, can we cluster by type of country? Because, if you have ultra-rare disease or rare disease, you may not have enough patients to even create an organization in these countries. So there are alternatives. We made some proposals, could we work on small countries just by compassionate need? There are opportunities, but you cannot put the burden on small companies that work essentially, or not mostly, but a lot on rare diseases, which will either not cover the patient, or you will have such an increase in price. So what's the matter?
Yes. Even pricing, of course, is far from unified across Europe, let alone access to the market. I mean, parallel imports have been a problem ever since I started looking at the industry. Where do we stand on that now?
So Jacky was saying it, industry is, very responsible for everything from the innovation to the access, and a product isn't a product unless it reaches the patient. So last year already, a year and a half ago, we realized that nobody was really moving on access. Everybody's just pointing fingers. It's the industry's fault, it's the member state's fault. And that is completely useless to a patient who's waiting for his or her medicine. So we took our responsibilities, having mapped out the time it takes for medicines to reach patients in different countries, and we made an industry commitment to file for pricing and reimbursement in all member states within 2 years of approval. That's not an easy commitment to take, especially for companies like Jacky's. But we took that commitment, and a commitment is useless unless you measure it. And next to it, we have a portal measuring how is that commitment going. And every 6 months, we show where are the products, why are they stuck, in which country, for what reason. Because once you see that, you can tell where is the problem, and maybe then you can fix it, rather than trying to put something in European legislation which will never work and will just effectively get innovation to leave Europe even further. So industry's taken those actions. Jacky was also talking about countries. We've also made a proposal to sell our products like we do in the rest of the world at a price that the country can buy, which is what we do in the whole world except for Europe because of what you mentioned. There's external reference pricing. One country bases itself on the other. There are rules. One country, I think it's one of the countries has to wait for a price in 10 other countries before it decides its price. How can you do that within 2 years? That's impossible. So why are we trying to fix everything with a piece of European legislation when you need to take concerted action as actors, industry, but not just industry, because there are other players. You mentioned parallel trade. There are other facets to access that we need to address now, not in the next 5 years that it's going to take with this revision. And then let's do with the revision what we need to do, which is stop and inverse the trend of losing out. Two different conversations that are being mixed right now, and it's just going to lose, everybody's going to lose out and the patient's going to lose out first, which is very concerning.
Of course, governments also fund R&D in the industry, as well as investors funding it, both through national agencies and governments and increasingly through the EU and Horizon Europe. I mean, how well is that mechanism working, either of you? I mean,
everybody, rest of the world, is a little bit jealous about the European instrument. They don't like the European bureaucracy, but they love the instruments. So I benefited from an SME instrument some years ago. They change sometimes the rules. There is not a specific instrument for life science. You know, it's a mix of everything, which I find a bit. It would be better to have some specific areas, you know, where we could claim that. There is still a little bit bureaucracy. It's pretty slow, so you need to fight a lot to get there. That's on the instrument. Then they have the European Investment Bank and the other instrument. My perception is that they give money where there is money. In other words, they don't take risks, which is, and it takes time. Are they understaffed or not? But it's extremely a long process and it takes time. It's very nice instrument, but what I see happening is that it goes to company at a certain stage already, which is not absolutely the best way to support innovation in my mind. But
yes. But
yeah, I mean, we're fantastic at funding research in Europe. We're great. You know, we're just the best. We do all this stuff, and then the research moves somewhere else. This constantly happens, and it's been 28 years I've seen this happen. It's getting kind of frustrating. So we're really good at this. And then for me, if there's a slide from the research all the way to the patient, the slide is like, it's not a slide. And you can't get there. So you're like, you look down and you think, oh my God, I'm never going to reach there. Let me go somewhere else. And today we have that opportunity of making that slide really shiny and slippery, and we can get to the patient. And I'm not seeing it. And this is what's concerning to me. So we'll just continue to fuel everybody else's innovation and products later. If the ecosystem stays, if the ecosystem goes, we won't even be able to do that anymore. And our patients will lose out. And we already have half the clinical trials in the US for advanced therapies, 1/3 of the clinical trials of China in advanced therapies. That's crazy because some of the researchers are European, and it's just incredibly frustrating for me to see that and no action.
If I may add something on the funding also from all the instruments of the European Union, is that we're spreading too thin also. And you know, because we are not unified, you have to make consortium of several countries, several institutes, which is just spreading. So it looks like 8 million, 10 million is a lot of, but if you spread it over 10 players in a consortium, you know what's going to happen. So that's not exactly what's happening in the US. The hubs are clearly identified. We try to have 10, 20, 30, 40 hubs, which is probably not exactly what we should do.
Now, we haven't talked much specifically about regulation and the performance of the EMA. I mean, before I open it up to questions, do you have any thoughts about how that could work better?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, it's not one country, and when we compare the US to Europe, it's not fair, right? So our European Medicines Agency has 27 member states in there analyzing the facts. So it's always going to be a bit longer, but today it's more than 2 years longer. It's twice as long as the US to get an approval. It's 420 days compared to 200 and something, which is already lengthening that time that it takes to get to patients, which is already lengthening that lack of attractiveness of Europe. So in the proposed legislation from the Commission, they are simplifying procedures, they are putting more on accelerated approvals. There are some good things in there, some sandboxes, which sounds weird, but it's actually a way of testing the new technologies that are going to come if they're combinations of AI and therapies, to see which are the right regulatory requirements that we want. So I think in the proposals from the Commission on regulatory improvements, there are some really good things if they can get through the Parliament and the Council now. And it hopefully will make the companies in the room and online interested in looking into a faster approval and more adapted in Europe, and companies like yours as well. Jacky, if we can keep you here.
I've got more questions, but I hope someone out there has a question for our panelists. Yes, near the front.
I mean, you characterize the problem very well.
Just a sec.
Because they don't hear you, otherwise I think.
So you characterized the problems very well, and it's multifaceted. But if you had a wish, I mean, or if you had a call to action to this group of people here or to the industry, what would it be that you would want them to do? What would your call to action be? I mean, who do you want to work with whom in order to address these problems? And what would you like them to do?
I'll let Jacky say, as part of the industry, answer that, and then Nathalie for the industry as a whole.
Get just more money in this segment of industry. Get just much more money in this segment.
So for me, it's really important, and of course, most people online in the room are not involved in public affairs, but this is a moment where the policymakers in Europe are deciding that legislation for the next 20 years. So your members of European Parliament, who are in constituencies perhaps where your companies are based, want to hear from you what matters to you if you want this legislation to come out the right way, because it's going to regulate us for the next 20 years. So this is a moment where you have a say. This is a democratic process. They are there also to represent us, and heads of state have said we want an innovative pharma industry, we want more incentives. So there is a sort of top-down request that also needs to be translated, but of course they need to hear from the constituents.
And getting more incentives will bring more money in this segment.
Correct. So there you go. That's a win-win for me, as opposed to a lose-lose.
Anyone else? Otherwise, I was going to point out that the EU 27 are far from united, but two of Europe's big life sciences powerhouses, this country and Switzerland, are further excluded, and that presumably makes things even more difficult. I mean, how do you see them, Britain and Switzerland, contributing to the sort of European effort in pharmaceuticals innovation, when Switzerland's not even in the Horizon Europe program at the moment, and Britain is knocking at the door and about to be admitted?
I'd go back to what Jürgen said, collaboration. You know, it doesn't have to be in the European programs, it can just be within the industry, so collaboration, partnership, because the ecosystem includes them. For us, that's never been different, and I think re-including them in the European instruments will be important, but is not necessary in terms of their role to play. And then compete, you know, in terms of being innovative. I think benchmarking is always good, and it does give us an opportunity to say, hey, look outside, just next door, look what's happening, look what they're doing. They are also a really important part of the active pharmaceutical ingredient production. In Europe, we are 64% producing active ingredient in Europe. Why is that important? Because we always talk about strategic autonomy and we're dependent on the rest of the world. Actually, innovative pharma isn't. And the UK and Switzerland make up 10% of that API production. So they're key in the ecosystem, I would say. But Jacky, from your perspective?
Yeah, the two different things. UK, you know, at least for the moment, it's a much better situation than it was 2 years ago. It seems to be smoothened. And we don't make a difference, you know, when we deal with a company. We work with companies in Europe or academics in Europe, wherever they are, and wherever they are good. You know, that's the first principle. Switzerland, it happened to me that I was lucky to work for the two giants pharmaceutical, and Switzerland is an ecosystem by itself, but in that life science, between Basel, hub of major pharmaceuticals, ETH, Zurich, and Lausanne. Look what one guy with a team could make out of Lausanne. Is on the map in the world. I wish you would find more entrepreneur or leadership making this in many other areas in Europe. So we are not making a difference. Honestly, we're just working with them. Switzerland is in Schengen, you know, so we, you know.
Yes, true.
innovation finds a way.
Yeah.
Last chance for the question. Otherwise, I was going to bring up an issue that we haven't discussed much specifically, or we haven't. That's the whole privacy, data protection, access to patient records, etc. How much of a help or hindrance are the rules on that, Nathalie?
So there's a great opportunity with the European health data space, known as EHDS. We're developing it. We saw during COVID how dangerous it is when you don't have interoperable systems and you can't even track what's happening in your own region in terms of, in that case, it was in terms of death, not even in terms of epidemiology. So really crucial for everything, for research, because we are both a data generator and a data receiver. For the progress of science in Europe and for the health of patients moving around in Europe, it's going to be essential to get it right. And if we get it right, it'll be another accelerator, another positive in our arsenal of hopefully attracting innovation. It's, again, something that's been discussed, various institutions getting involved, something that I would invite you to also get involved in if you're going to go away with lots of to-dos from this event today, but an opportunity, I would say, definitely.
Yes, do you have anything on?
Well, this would be a chapter by itself. It's about bureaucracy also. We are used to put many rules which are blocking science because we don't trust people. We don't trust people, so we put rules in place because we know 5% of the bad people are misusing it. Now, we put these bureaucratic rules in place. You bother 95% of good people, and the 5% have found another way to get around it. This is bureaucracy, and this is exactly Europe today. So we're going to have to change gear completely here.
Okay, 30 seconds each to sum up. Where realistically would you like Europe to be in 5 years' time in pharma innovation? Nathalie and then Jacky.
I want Europe to be on that other trend, going up in terms of attractiveness, in terms of investment, in terms of innovation, in terms of ecosystem vibrance and products actually reaching patients. I want patients to have access faster, thanks to the actions that we've taken and other partners will take, I hope.
I think the science is very good in Europe. We just have to put the right things in place to support that ecosystem. We are talking about incentives. I hope we're going to be heard. And then I see a bright future for Europe. I see more integration. We don't need less integration. We need more integration to cope with all the bureaucracy, in fact. It's like people think we are building bureaucracy in Europe. We're building because we are not integrated. That's the reason of the bureaucracy. So we need more integration, in fact.
That's a nice final thought. More integration to deal with the bureaucracy. Thank you both. That was a very stimulating conversation, and back to Hannah.